Okay.
Great. So, Tony, let's look at Lucille Clifton.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry, this is going to be a little more difficult than usual because I have a whole semester's worth of uh, things, but I'll try to boot them up as soon as I can here.
Oh, we
So
just
you're
need
good.
Lucille Clifton.
Oh, okay. Then just give me a second. Yeah, I didn't know
We're finishing
what.
talking about Lucille Clifton today. And then I'm
Okay.
going to
Oh,
a
okay,
little. That's where we're
okay,
starting.
all right.
I would like to say
Um,
a general thing. Are you uh, Anne familiar with, or are you friends with a poet named Jane Oliver?
Mary Oliver.
Mary Oliver.
Yeah.
Is she
Mhm.
is she somebody you know and respect?
Yeah, she's a good poet. She's extremely popular. She's dead now, but she used to make $12,000 a reading, which
whoa!
is
Who knew
way
there was big money in poetry?
well, there's
Jeez.
not for most of us. But
Oh my
yeah,
God.
I think some of her poems are really beautiful. Um, the problem is her poems all kind of end the same way. There's certain moves that she makes to get to the same place too often, in my opinion. But she's super, super, super famous. Yeah.
That's
Anyway,
probably why
the reason
she's
I brought her
famous.
up, the reason I brought
Oh,
her up is it came from my yoga class, and the teacher read us a spring poem
Yeah.
by Jane Oliver at the beginning and end. And after having been exposed to, especially Elizabeth Bishop and Lucille Clifton, who are my favorites of your course, I just thought how one-dimensional this is.
Yeah. Bravo. Bravo. You get the A plus for the most learning.
All right.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, I do think that Mary Oliver, some of her poems are beautiful, and they're the kind of poems that get put on posters and coffee mugs and so on and so forth. She has huge audience appeal, but yeah, compared to somebody like Lucille Clifton or Elizabeth Bishop, they are kind of one-sided. Yeah, absolutely.
For
that's
what
the kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff I say, dismissive stuff I say about Marcus Aurelius.
I agree with
You,
you about Marcus Aurelius. He's a
I,
boy.
I like him a lot, but he could go on a coffee mug, as you say.
So let's look at Lucille Clifton.
Yes.
Okay, I think I have it up here. Uh, okay,
Yep, this is it. And we're going to scroll way down,
okay,
almost to the end.
okay.
Keep going. Okay, now go up a little bit more. We finished last time with go up a tiny bit more. One more. Okay, this is where we are. Mulberry Fields. And I'm not going to talk about all of them because I do want to get to the end and then have time for review. But this is a really interesting poem about the history of slavery. It's a powerful poem. Mulberry Fields. They thought the field was wasting, and so they gathered the marker rocks and stones and piled them into a barn. They say that the rocks are shaped, some of them scratched with triangles and other forms. They must have been trying to invent some new language, they say. The rocks went to build that wall there guarding the manor, and some few were used for the state house. Crops refused to grow. I say the stones marked an old tongue, and it was called eternity and pointed toward the river. I say that after that collection, no pillow in the big house dreamed. I say that somewhere under here molders one called Alice, whose great grandson is old now, too, and refuses to talk about slavery. I say that at the master's table, only one plate is set for supper. I say no seed can flourish on this ground once planted, then forsaken. Wild berries warm a field of bones. Bloom how you must, I say. So I think, really beautiful, powerful evocation of this cursed land. Um, the mysterious signs on the stones, the presence of the slaves' bodies in the earth. Um, and the history of slavery that never goes away. And then the kind of curse, bloom how you must, I say, which is also an injunction. What, say it, tell it, as if the land could bloom. But yeah, so I just wanted to look quickly at that poem. This is longer lines than most of her poems. Again, free verse, same, no capitalization, no punctuation, but just I think a really beautiful evocation. So let's move on down farther.
Could I ask one question?
Yeah, sure.
Do you have any idea who is supposed to have put these stones there or inscribed them?
I think
Like,
slaves
would it?
did.
Yeah, because it would probably either be slaves or American Indians, but I just wonder.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think she's talking about slaves in
Yeah,
this.
yeah, that makes sense.
So let's go down some more. We don't need to look at this one. It's pretty obvious, but I wanted to show you because it's so much like Robert Hayden's poem about the slave ships with the names of the ships. So let's go down more. John. Okay, so toward the end of her life, Lucille Clifton wrote really powerful religious poetry. Um, Poetry which is both religious and questioning religion, questioning received stories about Judeo-Christian tradition. So John, I think beautiful poem. Somebody coming in blackness like a star, and the world be a great bush on his head, and his eyes be fire in the city, and his mouth be true as time. He be calling the people brother, even in the prison, even in the jail. I'm just only a Baptist preacher, somebody bigger than me coming in blackness like a star. That gives me shivers. One thing I love about it and some of the other poems is her use of, Black dialect. Somebody, the world be a great bush, his eyes be fire, his mouth be true as time. So taking this Judeo-Christian tradition and bringing it forward into Black religious belief, Black voices, um, and the really interesting evocation of the color black in this poem. Somebody coming in blackness like a star. Somebody bigger than me coming in blackness like a star. Now, the next series of poems, if we can scroll down. Oh, okay. Well, we're going to skip this one, but this is a poem about Mary. Brothers. Being a conversation in 8 poems between an aged Lucifer and God, though only Lucifer is heard, the time is long after. And I really love these poems. These are, you know, not God. Sure. Okay. Let's just read them and then talk a little bit. One, invitation. Come coil with me here in creation's bed among the twigs and ribbons of the past. I have grown old remembering the gardens, the hum of the great cats moving into language, the sweet fume of the man's rib as it rose up and began to walk. It was all glory then, the winged creatures leaping like angels, the oceans claiming their own. Let us rest here a time like two old brothers who watched it happen and wondered what it meant. Two, how great thou art. Listen, you are beyond even your own understanding. That rib and rain and clay in all its pride, its unsteady dominion, is not what you believed you were, but it is what you are. In your own image, as some lexicographer supposed. The face, both he and she, the odd ambition, the desire to reach beyond the stars is you, you, all you, the loneliness, the perfect imperfection. 3, as for myself, less snake than angel, less angel than man. How come I to this serpent's understanding? Watching creation from a hood of leaves, I have foreseen the evening of the world. As sure as she, the breast of yourself, separated out and made to bear, as sure as her returning, I too am blessed with the one gift you cherish, to feel the living move in me and to be unafraid. 4. In my own defense, what could I choose but to slide along behind them, they whose only sin was being their father's children? As they stood with their backs to the garden, a new and terrible luster burning their eyes, only you could have called their ineffable names. Only in their fever could they have failed to hear. 5. The road led from delight, into the sharp edge of seasons, into the sweet puff of bread baking, the warm veil of sheet and sweat after love, the tinny newborn cry of calf and cormorant and humankind. And pain, of course, always there was some bleeding, but forbid me not my meditation on the outer world. Before the rest of it, before the bruising of his heel, my head, and so forth. 6. The silence of God is God. Carolyn Forche. Tell us why, in the confusion of a mountain of babies stacked like cordwood, of limbs walking away from each other, of tongues bitten through by the language of assault, tell us why you neither raised your hand nor turned away. Tell us why you watched the excommunication of that world and you said nothing. 7. Still, there is mercy, there is grace. How otherwise could I have come to this marble spinning in space, propelled by the great thumb of the universe? How otherwise could the two roads of this tongue converge into a single certitude? How otherwise could I, a sleek old traveler, curl one day safe and still beside you at your feet, perhaps, but amen, yours. 8 is God. So, having no need to speak, you sent your tongue splintered into angels. Even I, with my little piece of it, have said too much. To ask you to explain is to deny you. Before the word, you were. You kissed my brother mouth. The rest is silence. Anybody want to comment on this series of poems?
This,
Wow.
th-
Go ahead.
yeah, this reminds me of an opera by Boito, Mephistopheles. The opening scene is the discussion between Mephistopheles and God. Mephistopheles is a bass baritone and God is the chorus. In fact, two choruses. And it's a magnificent scene where they're arguing over the soul of Faust. Here we don't hear God,
Yeah, we
but
don't.
we're presented with the notion of God and Satan as equals.
Yeah, brothers.
They're brothers, and in the opening, come coil with me. That God is also a snake,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
and there are touches like that here where we don't actually need to hear God's voice because we're hearing the echoes in Satan's voice.
Yeah.
Um, but it struck me that I missed God's voice in the form of a chorus. That's to me one of the most magnificent scenes in all of opera.
That's really nice, yeah. But I love how we're hearing Satan here, and Satan is not Satanized. You know what I mean? Satan and God are two old geezers, and they've been around forever. And Satan, is not quite equal to God, but pretty closely. And then there's this beautiful evocation, they were kicked out of Eden into delight, into not just pain and suffering, but into bread and love and flowers and animals and the splendor of the world, the whole Felix culpa, a fortunate fall that we talked about in literature classes. Um, but then also, once again, the bitterness toward God, like, how could you let these things happen? And then the rejoinder, the silence of God is God. When we come back and do more poetry, for sure, we're going to do Carolyn Forche, who is one of the most important and most memorable poets because she's still alive. She's essentially our age and she's just a magnificent poet. Um, so was Tony, were you going to say something a minute ago?
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, in the beginning, how you, I'm not sure I've seen this elsewhere, where Satan is talking about God having become immanent, in other words, physical. Uh, God seems to be incarnated almost with him and beside him.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a theme that runs through theology, how Jesus was the incarnation of God, and Jesus knew something God didn't know, which is
Mm-hmm.
what it's like to be more mortal and physical.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, this has been discussed in theology. And then the other thing I was going to say is the silence of God is God. There was an interview with Mother Teresa once, and I'm trying to think of the guy who was interviewing her. Anyway, it's kind of a funny person, but he asked her when she prays what she prays for, and she says, "Oh, I don't pray for anything. I just listen." And what does God say to you? Oh, he doesn't say anything either. He also listens.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it is.
That's great. That's beautiful. Other comments on this series? Well, let's move ahead then. We're almost to the end of the Lucille Clifton poems. So this is a super famous poem and it's so beautiful. And she's talking to us. She's talking to anybody who ever reads this or hears this poem. Won't you celebrate with me? Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight, my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. Ugh,
You know, the end of that is like Nietzsche's famous remark, what does not kill me makes me stronger. People often forget that it's a part of a sentence. The whole sentence is from the military school of life. What does not kill me makes me stronger.
yeah. I mean, this is, it's, Lucille Clifton really had nobility and she really had strength and staunchness, you know? And I mean, what a declaration, what a question. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? You know, I
Uh,
had
do
no
you want
model.
to do you want to expand on why she says born in Babylon?
Well, born in slavery,
I think it's more than that. I think it's
born in
the
bondage.
world seen as, what John Bunyan calls the city of destruction. We're already in an evil and doomed place. Obviously, it has reference to the Black experience particularly, but I don't think it ends there.
Well, I think it's a mistake to get too far away from the Black experience, though, because
Well,
I really,
except Babylon has been used uh, a kind of figure for the world as a corrupt and corrupting place.
yeah,
You know,
but
I was almost thinking that there may be a reference in a hymn
yeah,
that
for sure. By the
that
waters of
she's
Babylon, I sat me down and wept, for I remembered Zion. You know, the great, um, the
T.S.
I think there's
Eliot.
several Bob Marley songs that mention
yeah, Bob
Babylon.
Marley.
Such a melodious
Yep.
word.
Yeah,
Would she have been familiar with Marley?
yeah, by the waters of Babylon, where I sat down, and there I wept, for I remembered Zion. Sorry, I can't sing very well, but do 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 do, come away, captivity. Remember, I saw a song. Okay, how could I sing King Alpha's song in a strange land?
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
I it's also critical, I think, that she's not just black but a woman, and I think that
Yep.
is throughout the poem, through the poetry.
Yeah,
Is that I don't think a black man would write it like this,
exactly.
and
Exactly.
so I think it has to be both, as she says, both non-white and woman.
Yep,
So her triumph of survival is facing the intersection of those challenges, and
absolutely. Yeah.
so I
What did
think
I
that's
see to
important.
be except myself?
Yeah. I like the line, what did I see to be except my exact, that one really is the core of this, you know. I see myself as myself and I don't have there's no guidebook.
Yeah,
I have to take it from there and so we should celebrate that.
absolutely. And there's a lot of toughness in this poem too. Every day something has tried to kill me and has failed, you know. Maybe not physically murder, but she does write about murdered people. But kill me, kill my spirit, kill my joy, kill my sanity, kill my belief, kill my trust, kill my strength, you know?
Does anybody else feel like that? I mean, that's an intense thing to say. Every day, something has tried to kill me in some way. Like you say, you gave a bunch of modalities that might happen in, but still, I blithely go through life not assuming anything is trying to kill me. And so, what a thing to live with that she
Yep,
says that.
yep.
And
You're not
she
a black
yeah,
woman.
she talks about crossing the bridge between starshine and clay, clearly between life and death. But how does she maintain that? My one hand holding tight to my other hand. She's not holding on to the bridge. She's
Mhm.
not holding on to any external support. She's holding on to herself.
Yep,
Yeah.
And that's beautiful.
yeah. This poem makes me have tears in my eyes. This is a late poem, and it's just such a summation. And then I want to go to the last Lucille Clifton poem, Blessing the Boats, because out of this comes this beautiful prayer for really everybody, blessing the boats at St. Mary's. May the tide that is entering even now the lip of our understanding carry you out beyond the face of fear. May you kiss the wind, then turn from it, certain that it will love your back. May you open your eyes to water, water waving forever. And may you, in your innocence, sail through this to that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
This is a tradition, I guess you guys know, an ancient tradition of blessing the ships in the beginning of the season when they're launched and they go out to sea. And we do that every year in San Francisco Bay, and I've done it with my boats. You go out, you kind of get in a line, and as you pass the ship, they have a priest on it or a minister. This is out by Tiburon, and as you drive by, each boat is there's a prayer said over each boat, and as you sail by, and that's kind of a wonderful thing. That it happens every year. In fact, right around now, I don't know the date of it this year, but and so this, I wonder if she was familiar with that.
Oh, sure, because she lived in Baltimore.
I bet they do it in
Oh
Maryland.
yeah, yeah.
For sure. For sure. Remember, T.S. Eliot writes about that too in Dry Salvage's Ave Maria Stellas. He writes about that whole, Hail Mary, Queen of the Sea. Yeah. So, guys, final comments on Lucille Clifton.
Well,
What?
I agree with whoever said that she was one of his favorites of the poets we've read. She's one of mine too. And I also feel the same about Elizabeth Bishop. For some reason, the two of them, maybe because they were more recent in our class, but both of their poems really stayed with me and really impacted me a lot.
Yeah, me too. Other comments?
This poem is where I first became aware of Lucille Clifton, and it's one which brought me to tears when I first read it. And when I have that response, I always ask for permission to set it to music. And
So
so
have you done that?
and I haven't done it. Um, and what has held me back is the final line, through this to that. And I find it hard to imagine those words in music somehow. What I enjoy about this poem is the increasing activity. Um, at first you're carried by the boat, and then you kiss the wind and turn from it, and then you open your eyes and you sail. There's increasing evidence. It's like a series of waves carrying you further and further.
Yeah.
And as an ancient surfer, I find this sort of connection to the ocean quite moving.
Brian, when you compose things uh, to these poets, do you write the libretto, or is it entirely instrumental?
Mostly, these days I'm writing for chorus, um, sometimes for solo voice, but that's been a while. There are 4 or 5 local choruses that have done a lot of my music, and I can hand a piece to them and they'll at least consider it seriously.
So it's in other words, you're not just merely inspired by a poem. You write the music to the poem.
I write the music and the accompaniment. If I often I have a particular group in mind. Sometimes I'll approach a group for a commission, and often succeed. Um, but I know the groups that have performed my music, and I often know what they're looking for, and they trust me.
Cool.
Where do you live, Brian?
I live in San Jose, California.
Oh, okay.
Hmm. Any other final comments about Lucille? And then
Yeah, I think the breadth of her poetry is probably it was stunning to me. I had seen a couple of her poems before, but I hadn't actually looked at so many different pieces of so many different areas that to her and moods and voices,
yeah,
and it's just astonishing. It's like a whole world presented to you, and short poems. That's the other thing that's really striking is that she says a lot in just a few lines and
it does.
very concise.
As she said, people think it's easy to write these, but it's not, you know. Yeah, she really squeezes them. Yeah. Well, okay, now we're going to summarize from Walt Whitman through Lucille Clifton.
Thank you.
Actually, I do think that it's interesting to begin with Whitman and end with Clifton because they both open so many doors. Whitman obviously is a revolutionary figure in the history of American poetry with his free verse, with his little d democracy, with his enthusiasm for classes of people, occupations that were not generally considered to be acceptable for poetry, like, prostitutes or runaway. Go ahead.
Cleaners of privies.
Cleaners of privies, runaway slaves. Yeah, Whitman says, I embrace it all. I embrace everything. Whitman at one point called Leaves of Grass, he said, it's just a language experiment. And when I first read that, I was shocked. I'm like, what do you mean it's just a language experiment? But indeed, it is a language experiment. It's like, how can we bring all of everyday language into poetry? It's not the whilom erst thou, it's like I celebrate myself and sing myself, right? So it's the voice of a person speaking, even though it's highly wrought. Whitman with the long, long lines with free verse. Now, he's not the only person who wrote free verse back then, but it was very rare. And really, I would say by now, most poets write free verse. Certainly not all, and certainly not all the time. But free verse is a completely acceptable and important form of poetry. Whitman with, the long catalogs, the listing of things, the enthusiasm. Whitman, on the face of it, is the opposite of Lucille Clifton with his huge poems. Oh, let me tell you some more. Let me tell you some more. Let me tell you some more. And Clifton with, like, I'm done, right? But as Laurel just said, sorry, I know too many people named Lauren, and I'm constantly having to, with them. Anyway, as Laurel just said, Clifton gets really all of life into her poetry. Whitman got pretty much all of life into his poetry. I called Lucille Clifton uninhibited. Whitman was so uninhibited that he got fired for, what was considered by many people to be absolute filth and rubbish, writing about, homoerotic love, writing about the body, lines like the scent of my armpits, aroma finer than prayer. And you can just see deacons all over the United States dropping in their pulpits. I celebrate myself, all of me so luscious, you know, and then embracing death as beloved. In a poem like Out of the Cradle, Endlessly Rocking, death as the source of life, the ocean as the source of life, embracing, although he was not, I mean, his poems of supposed erotic attraction toward women are not his best poems, but the maternal is very, very present in his poems. Fluidity is very present in his poems. So we start with Whitman, and then we move from Whitman to Dickinson. Dickinson, like Clifton, um, as compressed as could be. Dickinson, every bit as great a poet as Whitman, and in so many ways, so different. Dickinson, always a religious poet, but always a questioner, unable to accept anything without interrogating it, without tracing the steps. Dickinson is somebody who really thinks her way through her poems. You know, I know that he exists. Somewhere in silence, he has hid his rare life from our gross eyes. So you can see, even in those 4 lines, those tiny lines, how something starts to fall apart, to devolve. He's not just saying, I know that he exists. I celebrate every day, whatever. It's like, no, it's undoing itself. It's undoing itself. So any certainty that's won is momentary and very hard one. Dickinson, a great nature poet, a great poet of the moment, a great poet of psychological states, states even of madness, was like a maelstrom with a notch, or poems about being haunted inwardly. Many, many, many poems about death. For Dickinson, as for Whitman, death was every day. Death was something that was not tucked away in a hospital ward. There's been a death in the opposite house as lately as today, she says. So you saw death. Walked to the grave, right? So Dickinson, this great poet who refused to cater to public opinion, who refused to change her poems because people told her, oh, that's not poetry. Dickinson, like Clifton, making these very unconventional choices, but with Dickinson, odd kind of Germanic I mean, capitalization of important words, breaking of rhyme, you know? Oh, the poor dear didn't know how to rhyme. Yes, she sure did, but she's using slant rhyme, off rhyme, broken rhyme on purpose. She's using versions of Protestant hymn meter, dee-dum, 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 like that. Um, and and spending her whole life writing so that after her death, over 1,770 poems were discovered in her room by her sister. And then this fascinating, um, bizarre story of different versions of publication, different editions of her poems for a long time. People thinking that they knew better and changing the rhymes, changing the meter, changing the capitalizations, changing the punctuation, getting rid of the dashes. I mean, practically books have been written about her use of dashes. That's an exaggeration, but not by much. So Dickinson is one of the world's greatest ever woman poets. And really, there's not really anybody like her. And then we move on to Frost. So, yeah, go ahead,
Just
Gary.
to say, I was struck and remain struck by the contrast between um, Whitman and Dickinson. And it's like Whitman is like a maximalist. He wants to embrace everything and talk about everything and just it's all fodder. And she's
Absolutely.
like a minimalist. She's just focusing on, this bird, this one little bird that she's seeing, and she's from that observation. I mean, using a photographic analogy, I mean, one
Yeah,
Whitman is like wide angle, panoramic.
yeah.
She's like close up, just intent, astute
Better.
observer. And
Yeah.
also, she feels like an introvert to me, and he feels like an extrovert.
She
It's
doesn't
just,
feel like an introvert. She was a total
I
introvert.
mean, it comes through in her poetry, just a completely different
Yeah.
sensibility. And I thought that was really, really powerful and striking between
Yeah.
the two of them.
Yeah. Pete?
Um, One contrast I think you have to be careful with is the long poem, short poem, maximalist, minimalist contrast. Because even though it's real, some of Whitman's very best
Oh,
poems
short.
are short and give you a moment, like The Dalliance of the Eagles, Sparkles from the Wheel, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer,
Yeah.
and there are quite a few more. And some of his worst poems are long, vapid, rhetorical poems where he keeps going without having that much to say. Like Song of the Open Road begins beautifully and it's a great idea, but I think the poem kind of
Yeah,
deteriorates
you're absolutely right.
because he tries to say too much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember we looked at the drum taps poems, those little poems about the Civil War, and I said that at Spangman, my professor said these are filmic. These are like a caught image
Yeah.
in a film, and it's really true. He's like, look, the guy predated film by decades, but he's doing the same kind of snapshot. Yeah. So yeah, but absolutely. And then we move on to Frost, and Frost straddles, um, you know, pre-modernism and modernism. Frost is a great modernist poet, but he's old-fashioned in some ways. Um, he always works with rhyme and meter. Not always with rhyme because he writes in blank verse, which is unrhymed iambic pentameter, but he always works in meter of some form or another. Frost, you can't do better than to study Frost for the variety of received poetic forms in the English tradition. He could write anything. He could write sonnets, villanelles, terza blank verse, you know, couplets, quatrains, verse paragraphs. There was really nothing that he couldn't with formal poetry. And Frost, like Dickinson, I think he's more in a Dickinsonian tradition than in a Whitmanic tradition, in that, like Dickinson, he's a skeptic. He's always skeptical. He's looking for once then, something, but he never just comes right out and says, okay, I know what that is. You know, Frost, again, a great nature poet, a great eco poet, which is why he's in the eco poetry anthology, and as is Dickinson, as is Whitman. A great poet writing about his particular locale, which is New England. And again, a long poetic career, lots of fame. Frost was the one who really perfected the art of giving poetry readings. And he played it to the hilt. He traveled all over and gave poetry readings, and they were recorded. And he developed a kind of Cracker Barrel persona in which to give his readings, which infuriates me because that's not really what Frost was like. But great, great, great poet. And then we move to T.S. Eliot, thorny T.S. Eliot. One of the great modernist poets, one of the poets whose work shores the fragments of a broken world. As he says, these fragments I have shored against my ruins. So we're seeing poetry reflect the breakage that comes around the time of World War One. Before that, in which, traditional religious beliefs were being challenged, traditional ideas about authority were being challenged, traditional ideas about the nation state were sort of beginning to be challenged. And then with World War One, a world that fell into pieces, Eliot refers to crowds, hordes of people swarming across the face of the earth. And we think about, now with refugees from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, refugees from the countries that were so damaged in the war, and these kind of faceless, classless millions of people. Eliot, Eliot, whose early poetry is a poetry of something pretty akin to despair, who converts in the 1920s to very high Anglicanism and eventually is able to use and believe in the word love in his poetry. Eliot, who definitely was a bit of a misogynist, very tormented about sexuality, very tormented about women, but also Eliot, the great critic, Eliot, whose read of English poetry through the centuries and of, poetry in Latin, poetry in German, and poetry in French, really helped to shape poetic taste for much of the 20th century. So, for instance, Eliot was one who championed the poetry of John Donne and the poetry or the playwriting of the Jacobean poets. Eliot did not care for Milton. Eliot, championed the French Baudelaire. Eliot is a great urban poet, did not write that much about the natural world. And for poetry to be able to come into the urban world, given that many of us live in urban worlds, was super important. It can't just be an escape from the city, you know. Eliot's brilliant essays, Eliot's idea of impersonality in poetry rather than just a kind of poem that is a cri de coeur, that is a personal complaint. Eliot's idea that the poem is a made thing and that it can be made out of fragments, that it can be made out of fragments from many traditions in many languages. Eliot's insistence that if you find his poetry difficult, you can just make yourself smarter rather than expect him to dumb it down. It's like when Joyce said, he says, it took me 17 years to write Finnegan's Wake, and you can spend 17 years reading it, you know? So this difficult, like admittedly, avowedly difficult literature, which does not plan to compromise about its difficulty. And then we move to Williams, who is very much in a Whitmanic tradition. Although Williams's poems look more like, they're short, most of them, although you didn't read Patterson, which is 240 pages long. But Williams, a free verse poet, he wrote practically nothing in rhyme and meter. He started a couple of poems in rhyme and meter and quickly diverged from that on purpose. Williams, like Whitman, a little d Democrat. Like Whitman, an enthusiast. Like Whitman, somebody who wanted to embrace all people, all classes, Black people as well as white people, who writes about the body. Williams, the doctor, who delivered, some 2,500 babies, something like that, who was the school doctor for the city of Rutherford, New Jersey, going to give the little kids their shots. So Williams, unsparing, unflinching in his embrace of the physical, in his embrace of the erotic too. Kenneth Burke, who was a good friend of Williams, the philosopher Kenneth Burke, said Williams had a sixth sense. And he said this was the erotic sense. And he tells a great story about Williams. He says, we were walking on the beach one day, and we saw a dog who obviously had a thorn in its paw. And he said, I would have, said, oh, the poor dog. But Williams took the dog's paw and gently felt around in it and extracted the thorn. And he said, that's what I mean by Williams's sense of touch. Williams says, we have given everything for touch, to be able to touch the earth, touch down on the earth, touch the lives in the earth. So Williams, the great enthusiast for other people's poetry too. I mean, Williams championed a lot of poets whom we don't remember now because they weren't that good, but they were trying to do what he was trying to do, which is bring poetry to United Statesers, to United States English, not King's English. Williams, who considered himself to be a bitter rival of T.S. Eliot, and was, although T.S. Eliot didn't think that Williams was important enough to notice. But Williams, who, really wanted to help foment an artistic renaissance in the United States. So he was working weekly, really good friends with people like Alfred Stieglitz, Georgia O'Keeffe, Martha Graham, the modern dancer. He was friends with Wallace Stevens. He was sort of rivals slash friends a little bit with Robert Frost. Robert Frost competed with everybody in the world, and Williams was friends with H.D., who, however, was living in Europe. He was friends with, I'm blanking on her name. Oh, Denise Levertov. He was revered by people like Allen Ginsberg and Robert Creeley and Robert Duncan and Denise Levertov, who really saw in him a kind of father figure. They're a later generation, but they were profoundly influenced by and wanted to do the kind of work that he was doing. And then we moved to Wallace Stevens. Stevens, the insurance salesman, the
Yeah,
go ahead.
and I'm just, I've never thought of any of these poets as being competitive, but you say, uh, well,
Yeah.
it just didn't ever occur to me. They're not like on a basketball team or something. How does that even come out? How do we even know about that?
They
And how is
wrote
your
about it.
success measured in the world? Is it how much you get published, how
Oh,
popular you are?
oh
Well,
my
how does
God.
this work?
Okay. Eliot, by the time he was in his late 20s, was famous throughout the English speaking world. Okay. Eliot had, prime publishers. Williams was paying to get his stuff published for the whole first 3 decades of his writing and publishing life.
Yeah, but you have to remember that Eliot also had enemies in the literary
Sure, he
establishment.
did. He did.
And there's a story about a
Including,
Cambridge Don saying, when the trains first came to Cambridge on Sunday, this is equally displeasing to God and to me. And F.R. Leavis said that was the attitude of most of the Cambridge Dons when he started teaching the poetry, not only of Eliot, but of William Butler Yeats
yeah.
and Joyce and Lawrence.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh my God, there's a lot of rivalry in the world. There's a lot of rivalry because what you're looking, number one, for yourself to be heard, but also with regard to Williams and Eliot, Williams was really trying to, not by himself, but with others, shape a tradition. Williams knew that Eliot was a great poet. And when Eliot moved to England, Williams felt that Eliot had taken this great promise and decamped, had gone over to, the old world. And I mean that in what Williams felt was an outmoded and exhausted mode, you know? So, I mean, there's still a lot of rivalry, sure. My God, blood
Wow,
is spilled. Woo-hoo.
this is like just a revelation to me because Brian's a musician. I spent my whole life in supposedly a very egocentric field, and I didn't run into that kind of thing. People are more brotherly and supportive of one another. I think it's because I mean the no, I don't think I just imagining it might be because music is a collaborative thing. You do it with other people, whereas poetry, you sit down by yourself and write. Now, songwriters, I don't know. but even with songwriters, I can't really think of guys being all upset that somebody else was successful. I suppose it happens. Maybe I'm just not in the egocentric world, and I'm not living in Hollywood. Maybe that's my problem.
Yeah.
How about Drake and Kendrick Lamar?
Well, in rap, now that's a whole different thing because they have their, their diss tracks and so forth. Yeah, I that happens, but I don't remember that so much in rock and roll. I mean, Elvis would say nice things about Little Richard. Little Richard would say nice things about Elvis. The Beatles would say nice things about the Rolling Stones.
Well, the Beatles didn't always say nice things about each other.
But
Well, yeah, I mean they're like brothers. They're gonna have fights, but
Yeah,
obviously they got along well enough.
yeah, for a
It's like a
while.
family that has had 10 kids and the wife and the husband are always fighting, and you go, well, they're not fighting all the time.
No, exactly, exactly, exactly. Yeah, Peter,
there's
you
a
can say.
couplet of Blake's, uh, the poison of the honeybee is the artist's jealousy. But the bee creates honey and wax, but it also has
Stings.
a sting. But the thing is, Blake recognized this as the poison of the honeybee rather than what makes the honeybee creative. And I think the problem with Harold Bloom's theory of the anxiety of influence, which I think is fortunately less influential these days, is that he pretty much thinks that the honey of the honeybee is the artist's jealousy, that jealousy is what motivates
Mm.
writers and creative artists generally. And I think that doesn't work.
No,
That's not how it is.
but people are human beings. I mean, it's natural. Number one, not all poets are nice people. Okay?
Oh no,
I
say
mean,
it isn't so, Anne.
yeah, seriously, that's just true. Not all poets are nice. But number two, you lay your soul on the line. And it can be really painful to see other people not valuing that or not caring about it, or to see somebody getting all the cookies, getting all the goodies, you know? Um, Poets experience rejection a lot.
Well, so do musicians, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying I'm a pretty nice person, but there are people that I'm quite envious of. Peter's snickering, and he knows exactly who I mean, you know. But it's much better um, if you can work harmoniously with others. But there's a lot of big egos. There's a lot of big egos, and to some extent, you have to have a pretty healthy ego to think that your words are worth listening to.
All that is true of music too. I'm just we don't have to get stuck on this, but I'm just curious. If, certainly there are some jealousies in the music business, but I just think it's because it's an individual effort. Being a poet is not something you sit down with a committee and do. You do it all by yourself. Whereas being a musician
Yeah.
is is very rarely are you a solo artist. I mean, the folk singers were solo artists. Maybe they were all pissed off at each other, but uh, I don't know. Brian, do you run into that and into that?
Well, I tend to be operate at the level of classical music rather than
Well,
popular
still,
rock music, and there's a
are you
great
saying
deal
they
of
have no egos?
no, there's a great deal of enmity. After all, to get a piece performed by an orchestra means that somebody else's piece is not being performed by that orchestra, and to listen to critics who may be party to one group of composers or another is is to understand that there is bias,
Yeah.
and that's that happens in poetry too. You're competing for grants, you're competing for publication, you're competing for commissions, and um, then this whole aspect of the academic aspects of classical music, the
Hmm.
business of atonality,
Yep.
which um, was broken out of recently, but it means that that area is kind of fragmented now. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm familiar with those kinds of enmity, those kinds of enmity.
I mean, Tony,
I think there's competition in almost every artistic field and creative field,
sure.
especially when you're innovating because you're going beyond what is accepted and popular, and you get criticized. I remember Stravinsky when they first performed Firebird, audiences walked out. I remember when Dylan first plugged in an electric guitar, people were extremely angry. I think Hemingway was known for having some serious grudges against other writers. I mean,
Gotcha.
this is not unknown in creative work.
Yeah,
Right.
but I just have to say I haven't experienced it that much at all. And Hendrix was not exactly unoriginal, and everybody loved him the minute they everybody worshipped at his feet. All Clapton went to see him, so it's not universally true in music that some fabulous guy is all of a sudden hated and
Right.
envied.
Well,
I don't know. I
okay,
don't want to get
just want
stuck
to say
here.
this. Poetry Magazine gets approximately 30,000 submissions of poetry a year, of which you guys who read The New Yorker or read, no, I'm sorry, The New Yorker gets about 30,000 submissions a year, of which they publish 100. So, if you want to think about competitiveness, now obviously maybe 25,000 of those are terrible right up top, but not all of them are.
I
And
remember I remember making the point that it was harder to for Britney Spears to get in the Mickey Mouse Club than it is to get into Harvard.
yeah,
A
yeah,
lot harder.
On the subject of poets promoting other writers, William Carlos Williams was very generous that way, but Anne said many of the writers he promoted are forgotten and deserve to be forgotten. Somebody who has a very good record that way for all his personal failings is Ezra Pound.
yeah,
He not only promoted the
yeah.
work of friends of his like Joyce and T.S. Eliot and
And
Hemingway,
Williams.
he
And
and Williams, and he and Williams was also a friend, but he promoted the work of really great creative artists, Frost and D.H. Lawrence being examples, whom he didn't even like and who didn't even like him, but
no,
he
it's true.
recognized how good they were.
It's true.
Unusual.
Okay,
Sorry,
so
I kind of stopped us here. Go ahead,
let's keep
Anna.
moving. Okay, so
My apologies.
it's okay. It's okay. So we talked some about Mariette Moore, who was good friends with Williams, also good friends with T.S. Eliot. She's one of the people like Ezra Pound and like H.D. who had, a really good friend in both camps. Okay. Mariette Moore, difficult, eccentric, great poet writing about animals, great poet making up these interesting forms, um, a great kind of collagist in her poems, uh, bringing together all kinds of strange and wonderful facts. And then moving on to Wallace Stevens, who's really an aesthete, who's a great poet celebrating the imagination. And I don't have too much to say about Mary Moore or Wallace Stevens because I like them both a lot, but I know them somewhat less well. Wallace Stevens's poetry is not really aiming toward the average human being. He's aiming toward people of, very refined tastes. And he's really aiming toward his own solitude, very much a solitary type of person when he wasn't being an insurance salesman. Um, there's a great cartoon that I have. It's people standing at a cocktail party, and this woman is saying to a man, now remind me which one is the doctor and which one is the insurance man. And like that's kind of cool. But anyway, okay, then let's see. We moved on to um, Robert Hayden and Gwendolyn Brooks, and who's the third person? Oh, da 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 da. Southern Road.
Oh, Sterling A.
Sterling
Brown.
A. Brown.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we moved on to rather briefly, three important early 20th century African American poets. And we start seeing a lot more emphasis on American history here, especially the history of slavery. And we start seeing with Sterling A. Brown the celebration of um, blues, the celebration of work songs, slave songs. So therefore, the celebration of folk art and folk song rather than, just simply high art or high song. Um, and we start seeing much more, as I said, just much more assertiveness about the importance of taking Black history into account and into poetry and into public consciousness than had ordinarily been the case. Who did we talk about after that? Talked some about Gwendolyn Brooks. Who did we talk about? Who? Who do we talk about next,
Robert
guys?
Lowell and John Berryman, I
Robert
think.
Lowell and John Berryman. Peter gets to talk briefly about them. Take it away.
I find this kind of summarizing very difficult.
Yeah,
I
I hear
think
you.
Lowell at his best is a great poet. He's also connected to an older classical and European as well as American tradition in something of the way T.S. Eliot is. But I think his greatest book and his big breakthrough is Life Studies, where he starts being more relaxed about meter and rhyme, though he still uses them, and more open to autobiographical material and all sorts of, as Alan Tate said, with worry, trifling details, which he sometimes makes very significant. Berryman, I think he begins as a poet who is often forcing it, as I think he does with Homage to Mistress Bradstreet. And then he finds the form of the dream songs, which is perfectly his form. And even though you can question his use of Black dialect and his use of baby talk, and the frankly opaque or unintelligible way his mind moves in some of the dream songs really is, I think, a great long poem, and that's unusual.
Okay.
That's about all I have
Now
to
we're
say
going to talk
about
about
that.
Elizabeth Bishop. Elizabeth Bishop, good friends with Robert Lowe. Elizabeth Bishop, under recognized by the general reading public until, sort of second wave feminism and later. Elizabeth Bishop, an amazing poet. And again, well, Robert Lowell with
What do you thought? What do you?
title
Well, I don't know what title you want.
Notes for Union Dead and Life Studies. Life Studies.
Yeah.
Robert Lowell really ushered in a whole era of what came to be called confessional poetry, which is poetry writing really frankly about the difficulties and traumas of their lives, such as divorce or such as the suicide of people or insanity, things like that. Elizabeth Bishop, in contrast, very private about her public life, although she had a fairly tragic life in many ways, but an amazing, amazing artist and perfectionist of her poems. Just truly a great poet and one who, as Barry can attest, just grows better and better the more you read her. She's always a deeply satisfying poet to read because her work is so beautiful, just so complex and so beautiful. And then after her and Lowell and Berryman, I think the next person we talked about was Galway Cannell. Galway Cannell, um, great poet from the mid 20th century, early 21st century. No, when did he die? 1990 something.
Uh, no, he died
2000,
in 2014, I think.
2014, so early 21st century. Yeah, okay, again, a New England poet like Frost, a great fan and admirer of Frost and of Williams, but also a great poet of darkness, obsessed with death, obsessed with ritual, as in The Bear. A great poet, again, of the erotic, a celebrant of the erotic and a celebrant of the natural world. And somebody whose language is very powerful. somebody who has his roots also in medieval poetry with Francois Villon, translated Villon. He admired his work very much. And then coming right up to the present time with Lucille Clifton, and we've been talking about her. So we're seeing, I think, more and more doors opening, more and more variety in the kinds of poems and in the kinds of experiences, the life experiences of the poets that we're looking at. And this just proliferates up to the present time. A lot of the poets who are receiving the most attention now, if you look at like who's winning prizes and stuff, are poets of color. Just a lot of them, probably most of them. Um, and so there's a lot of countries, backgrounds, experiences, a lot of world history is being written about. Um, Poets coming from Africa winning big prizes, poets coming who lived through or whose parents lived through the Vietnam War, poets writing about ice, poets writing about, global politics and so on. So there's a lot of feeling, and poets writing about the environmental catastrophes that we see every day. There's just a lot of feeling of important work to be done, important stories to be told, but also just being present to be had. So the world of poetry is kind of wide open right now. Um, and yes, there's a lot of competition, but
Is
there's
that
also a lot
true?
of really good stuff being done.
Is that true internationally as well? As we've just covered Americans, but this thing you just noticed the theme of widening, or is it that Americans were constricted until now and now they're feeling their? What do you think about that?
Well, Americans weren't the only ones that were constricted. Look at the French academic tradition or the British tradition. I don't know other national poetries as well. I think that, well, for instance, okay, here's an interesting thing. The University of Mississippi has a pretty little MFA program. It can take at most five poets and five fiction writers a year over a 3-year program. So the biggest it could be is 30, which is pretty little given that places like Iowa have over 100. Three of the writers coming in out of 10 next year are from Nigeria. It's like we have a pipeline to young Nigerian poets, because a few years ago we admitted a couple, and there were a couple who wanted to come, but our finances were not good enough, so they went elsewhere. But these guys have won international prizes by now. And so they're telling everybody back home, like, apply to Mississippi, is funny, actually. Um, so I can't speak for other countries, but I know that there's a big interest in our own MFA program in attracting people. One of our greatest, best poets that went through too recently is from Nepal, and he also has by now a huge reputation, so
If I can say something that may sound like maybe more negative or more conservative or both than I really am, there is this widening in terms of whose experience gets to count in poetry, but there's also a narrowing, I think, of the audience for
yeah,
poetry, in that sometimes
Hmm.
feel there are more poets than there are readers of poetry. And I don't think that that's in any simple sense the fault of the poets. People used to blame this on Eliot and
yeah,
Pound and Joyce and so on. And I don't think that's fair, but I also don't think it's a good thing.
yeah,
And the other thing has to do with the narrowing in terms of time, presentism,
yeah,
to the point where anybody earlier than Frost or Stevens or Eliot, with a few exceptions, kind of disappears from the picture. And a lot of the greatest poets of the past
yeah.
are kind of lumped together as dead white men and not read the way they should be read.
I agree.
And that goes back to Chaucer and Shakespeare and, includes a lot of people
I
after
agree.
them. And, I don't think it's a good idea to imitate anybody. But if you don't have a knowledge of what has been achieved in the field that you're going into, you're really missing something.
I agree.
And I think that happens even to scientists, that they may know their science very well, but they don't know the history of science. And there are things about studying Darwin or studying, Newton or whoever it may be that you can't get only from studying science as it currently exists.
I I have to go, but I think that's well put, and it's interesting to me that um, I I'm wondering, and if you have contrasted the American poetry experience as a whole with other places. When I was in Russia, when my daughter was studying there, and I think she commented on this too, knowing Russian poetry was sort of a very
Yeah.
widespread thing.
Yeah.
People would rattle off. Everyone could quote, Onegin
No, I
or
totally agree. I know. Or like look at Palo Neruda, who could draw,
and I don't
20,000
do
people
it.
to a painting.
They were
Or Cuba. No, I agree. And that's totally true. Yeah, we all have to go because it's now 1:17.
yes.
We
I
have to get on.
and I'll
But
see.
thank you
I
guys.